Hello, I'm Rizal Rozina and welcome to the first episode of Leaders Speakeasy with Rizal and Rozina. And my co-anchor is Rozina Aziz, co-founder and CEO of Metamorphosa, a boutique consultancy which offers customized solutions for individuals, brands, and companies. Rozina has vast experience in corporate Malaysia, including media, and she's currently a global leadership coach. Before we begin, let's watch the webinar hygiene video.
Welcome to Astro AWANI Link's brand new webinar platform designed to enhance your experience. A couple of hygiene points. We recommend that you shut down other video and audio tabs to clear up your bandwidth for a better experience. Should you experience any technical difficulties such as lag or interruptions, please click on the red reconnect button. If there is a major glitch that is experienced by a majority of the people in the room, we may reset the entire system. Just sit back and relax. You will be taken to a new room automatically. If you have a question you would like to ask the speakers, kindly mark your remark as a question. And finally, we would appreciate it if you could tell us what you think of your webinar experience. Do give us a 5-star rating if you like the session and write to us via the contact us form on our website.
As Malaysia faces challenges during these difficult times, a stiff competition from our neighbours, conversations on nation building often turn to leadership gaps. Turning the narrative on its head, Leaders Speakeasy will direct the focus towards the positive. We will talk to the strong leaders of today and how to build current and future leaders, on how to build current and future leaders. We want to reframe the conversations around leadership with the best interests of the nation always foremost in our minds. If you have questions, again, post them in the chat box and we will select a few to be posed to our guest at the end of this show. Rosie?
Thanks, Rizal. With us here today is Dato Sri Nazir Razak, a well-respected leader and an old friend of mine since university days. Dato Sri Nazir started out in a small-sized Malaysian bank and was instrumental in growing CIMB into a successful universal bank focused on ASEAN countries. A cancer survivor, he recently championed the Only Man Can campaign to create awareness of prostate cancer based on his very own experience. Today, we'll be talking to Dato Sri Nazir to get a first-hand glimpse into his perspectives on leadership and nation building. In sharing his leadership experience, we want to build an important bridge to inspire young future leaders to propel the nation forward. Nazir, thank you so much for being with us on our very first episode of Leaders Speakeasy with Rizal and me.
Thank you, and congratulations on your new show. I'm not sure why I agreed to be the guinea pig, but then, I've learned
we really appreciate it.
Long ago that when you say yes to Rosie, you don't look back.
So, Dato Sri Nazir, you came from a family of prime ministers, but yet you chose to build a successful career in banking. So, and now, interestingly, you've made that transition to philanthropy and nation building. So I guess our question is, what key life experience have actually shaped you as a leader? And maybe you could share with us what's led to this transition and this new burning passion for nation building.
Well, that's a long story, but basically, when I reflect back on my growing up, I think leadership was something that is more nurture than nature. I think that's where I lean on the debate. When I was young at St. John's Primary School, I remember every single class that I was in, I was the class monitor. And for all those years and until now, I have no idea whether I deserved to be the monitor or they did it because I was the Prime Minister's son at that time. But then, I went to boarding school in the UK, and there I was the diversity guy. I was the only foreigner in a house at school of about 60 kids. And there I learned a lot about leadership as I grew up the system, especially on the sports field. I think you learn a lot on the sports field. And of course, I aspired to be the head of my house, and I was eventually, which I considered a very big achievement considering I was the only, as I said, the only foreigner in the whole house, and it did require, and there's no messing around. You're not there because they wanted a diversity candidate. You're there because you can control 60 boys, and I think stuff I learned along the way was how you get people to do what you need them to do, how you encourage them, the carrot and stick part of leadership, and so on. And of course, I went into banking when I got home, and again, I think I learned about. I brought some of the lessons from my school days, but also learned new things about leadership in a Malaysian setting. And as I said, after 10 years at CIMB, I became CEO, and the rest, I guess, is history, leading CIMB in its transformation from a local investment bank to a regional banking group over that history. But of course, at the end of it, it was time to change, to move on, and I went into other things. And you mentioned one of the things I do now is to campaign for prostate cancer awareness. I think that's about me giving back to society because I consider myself incredibly lucky to have survived that scare. And in terms of nation building and politics and all that, well, that's another long story. I mean, I started this part of my journey sometime back in 2015. At that time, I was incredibly concerned about what was happening in the country, especially with regard to 1MDB, and that kind of dragged me a bit into politics. I was concerned about Tun Razak legacy, which I'm very passionate about, and I grabbed on to this whole notion that there is a massive breakdown in the system that we created, the system of democracy and nation building that was created, and that since then, I've been championing this idea that Malaysia needs a reset. And that's why I go out there and talk and as well write about setting up a national consultative council the way we did back in 1970, because I think there's just too much wrong with the system today. We need to do a holistic reset.
So when you talk about the holistic reset, right, do you actually believe that we now in Malaysia, when we look at nation building, do we have the right leaders with the right skills to take Malaysia in the right direction?
Well, I think we do have a lot of leaders in Malaysia. I think we have at least our fair share, if not more than our fair share. Unfortunately, two things. One is many leaders are not in politics today. Two is many of the good people that went into politics have found themselves compromised by the system, by what they needed to do to remain or thrive in politics today.
Dato Sri, for the younger generation, how can they build themselves to be future leaders and contribute towards the nation building ambition? What does it take for the younger generation to become the right leaders for the nation?
I think it starts with a passion for the cause. I always think that people need to buy into the mission. You must be clear in your mind that that is really for you. That is one thing that you want to do. Two is I think it's about embracing the right set of values to lead, and I think good leaders must start with. I always think values are these things that are all there. You can Google it, and there are like 74 options or something like that. You just pick 2 or 3 for yourself. You must always pick integrity, I think. You must pick hard work as well, and others that you're comfortable with. Pick the right set of values and stick to them, and use them as your kind of guiding constellation of your life as a leader. I think that in the Malaysian context, diversity is our strength. Diversity defines Malaysia, and one needs to be good at leveraging diversity to be a good leader in the Malaysian setting.
You mentioned good leader. Perhaps, Rosie, before I let you ask your next question, can you perhaps define this good leader phrase that you've mentioned?
I think a good leader ultimately is someone that is able to set the agenda and move followers to that agenda. I think that in a nutshell is what I think a good leader does.
I think leaders are very often tested on during critical times. So I think one of the things that we've been scouring social media, we look at the thermometer checks on what people view as leadership gaps. Yeah? So I mean, let's face it, right? To say that the COVID pandemic has put a spanner in the works is just a gross understatement. We've lived through it, we're still living through it, and it is a very difficult period in recent times, and there's so many leadership challenges, and all eyes are on leaders to steer us out of these turbulent waters and to rebuild our present towards a greater future. So based on your experience during the pandemic as a critical leadership lesson, what do you feel we did right, and what do you feel are some of the leadership gaps in recent times?
Well, I think what Malaysia did right, particularly at the start, was to allow the experts to take the lead. And quite clearly, when the professionals were taking the lead, our kind of COVID numbers were actually relatively encouraging. The problem set in when politics took the lead. I think the trigger point was the Sabah election. And I think we then saw our numbers deteriorate significantly. And so now it's not about, to me at the moment, the crisis is systemic. There is a crisis in terms of the system itself, not just about leadership per se. I think that the Malaysian system, even good leaders get kind of sidelined or distracted by a system. I've written elsewhere about how Malaysia is basically run by a three-headed monster, which is money politics, identity politics, and concentration of power. These three have actually come together to undermine our leaders.
Sri, I've got a question. Well, as Rosie said earlier, this is a very challenging period for this nation. So difficult decisions must be made to break free from the traditional ways of doing things. Do you think leaders, senior leaders, emerging leaders have what it takes to break free and move forward more boldly? Do you believe that they have what it takes to do that?
Well, I hope so. But for us to move forward, boldly, I think we have to be bold as a nation. And as I said, boldness now, given the current situation, requires a holistic reform agenda. And that is something that, one person cannot do. It requires everyone to move in a certain direction. It requires everyone to recognize, all our leaders to recognize, there is a major crisis in our system, and we need to have complete reform.
I think part part of the reform that we are going to face is to do with how Malaysia goes forward as a nation, as an economy. So, I mean, definitely the pandemic presents so many challenges for us moving forward. I think one of the general threads of conversations out there is, the state of regional and global competitiveness. And I know there's many factors to it. So, I mean, we are an important force in Southeast Asia. We've got, it's got a total population of over 660 million, GDP of 3.1 trillion US dollars. But I mean, there is still that sobering fact, right? That Malaysia represents only 5% of the regional population and 11% of the regional economy. So I would think that, and I think many feel out there, that global competitiveness is a core and central part of nation building, assuming we get the political landscape right going forward. So you've been successful in leading CIMB, from being a small local player to a universal bank, right? So, in your mind, are we well positioned? Are we doing the right things to be globally competitive and to grow beyond our national borders?
Well, I think that Malaysia certainly has the potential, and I've always said that diversity, which defines our nation, also defines how good Malaysians are in diverse settings, which is what being multinational is all about. I recalled when I was building out CIMB quite clearly. It was the Malaysian leaders that were more comfortable operating in different markets and managing people of different cultures, etc. I think that from a small country, which by definition means we have a small domestic market, to basically evolve internationally, it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. And it's almost like one needs to lead with an underdog mentality at all times. That's one. And two is, I think we do need the collective support of the government. I think that some of that push to help Malaysian companies regionalize has kind of fallen off, especially in the last 5-6 years. If you recall, at the time when CIMB, Maybank, AirAsia were really taking the lead in creating regional multinationals, we had a very supportive government platform. We had the GLC platform, but also we supported other Malaysian companies, albeit often informally. I think that's missing. We need to rebuild that. We need to have put this agenda back on our radar and work together to help Malaysians build out beyond Malaysia itself. And that, of course, also includes driving the agenda for ASEAN integration.
And Dato Sri, I think before we move on to the next question, I think let's address the fact that we can't really see you right now. It's as if you're on Clubhouse. So we'll let you perhaps take a short break and to reset your camera. And meanwhile, Rosie and I will continue the conversation. And we can perhaps, Rosie, look at, share with the viewers what we plan to ask next. And Dato Sri can join us briefly after he resets his camera. Is that okay, Dato Sri?
Yeah, I have no idea why I can't be seen. But anyway, let me work it out. I'll come in again. All right.
Let us know, Dato Sri, yeah? So Rosie, so we've got these a few questions that we've asked so far. Do you think, or do you believe that Sri has perhaps answered some of your really pressing questions?
Yes, I think the issue to me of nation building is is something that an issue that I think is close to most of our hearts, right? We are Malaysian. We're proud of being Malaysian. We have our concerns, whether it's in the political landscape or the economic landscape. I think one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation was, we look at the mood out there. People are questioning, do we have the right leadership? And I think that's something that, do we have the right model of leadership or the right policies in place, right? And I think, we need to, the thinkers and the leaders to help propel us forward, right? To create the right environment so that we can build the nation in the right direction, correct whatever wrongs, and move forward, and regain, and just grab the market out there, be globally competitive. And I think part of that conversation that we certainly want to get into with Dato Sri when he gets back is on how we actually retain talent, and what sort of talent we need in order to do the hard work ahead, because I don't think it's a simple thing that we have ahead of us, and I
Okay.
think
I'm back, I think.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dato Sri, for rejoining us. I think I want to pick up on the thing that you said earlier, which is Malaysians are doing really well in leadership positions overseas. And you mentioned how Malaysians were a bit more helpful to take the leadership role. And why do you think that happened? Why not thrive and flourish here, as opposed to maybe in leadership positions overseas? How do we create the best environment for and opportunities to stop talent outflows?
Well, you should have joined my clubhouse on Sunday. That was the topic of discussion. We had Danny Kwa, who was formerly head of the LSE, on the call. I mean, he obviously is one incredibly well-qualified and talented Malaysian that never came home. And we put it down to both push and pull factors, obviously. And I think that, it is, okay for Malaysians to work overseas, but we hope that, with their talents and their experience, they eventually come back to help build the nation. And to do that, one needs to have the pull factor. And we had many questions from actually non-Malaysians overseas, and they, I guess, they care less, so that they were quite open about why they're not home. The perception that they would not be able to achieve their dreams, to fulfill their true potential at home, particularly in the case of non-Malays. And I think even I have a lot of friends who are Malays who don't come back because they're worried that if they come home, they succeed. People say it's because you had the help of affirmative action and so on. So we need to relook at this whole paradigm. How to encourage people to come home and try and fight for a better Malaysia, as it were. And in that process, we need to pull together, I think, a new plan so that people feel that, Malaysia is a place that they can work and they can thrive. And to be fair, there are many companies who are, have been very successful at bringing Malaysians back and making them achieve their potential, but there are too few of them. You look at AirAsia when they came up with their kind of game-changing business model, bringing back pilots and so on and so forth. CIMB in the early parts, we were bringing back a lot of finance professionals from overseas because we convinced them that they could come back and achieve their dreams in our organization. But we really have to have more and more of such companies, and to relook at the overall government policies and attitudes in that respect.
I think that's a very, very important discussion to go forward, right? I mean, hopefully we see, like you said, we see more corporations, we see more organizations doing the same. I think on the issue of talent as well, I always feel that diversity, I mean, you talked about diversity earlier, Nazir, and I think diversity is a very important thing to have in this conversation. So we want to talk about DEI, specifically diversity, equity, and inclusivity in leadership. So I think, there's been a lot of, Harvard, Stanford research on this, and they have found a link between DEI and performance of companies worldwide. So there are two critical areas which the World Economic Forum has looked at, so I'm looking at the women's participation. I think Rizal's going to ask you about young leadership. So women's participation remains low. There are two areas, so I'm going to take you through the first one first, which is economic participation and opportunity. So earlier we talked about talent coming back to participate in the economy, and certainly we want to see more women as well and the young to participate. The second area where there's low participation is political empowerment. So if we go to the economic participation and opportunity issue first, I mean, Rizal, you have the data, right? I mean, Malaysia's not doing too bad.
Yeah, when it comes to gender gap, Malaysia appears to have done quite well. We have closed the 64% of the economic gender gap against the global level of just 58%. Women occupy 26% of board seats in the top 100 public listed companies here, the ratio or the highest ratio in Asia. And but we still thrive, or we're still below the targeted 30%, and only 25% of top companies listed on Bursa Malaysia have committed to at least 30% female board participation. Rosie?
So I think that right there is also, resources that we are underutilizing, because, women are making up a high proportion of those who actually gain entrance into, universities, higher institutes of learning. So I would really like Dato Sri Nazir to get your perspective on the importance of leaders, because I mean most of the leaders out there are still predominantly men. I'd love to hear your perspective on the importance of these leaders in bringing about great diversity by having more women on boards and in senior management, and how can we get more men to play the advocacy role?
No, I think that we need to maybe get people to appreciate, understand diversity better for a start. I mean, I've always, I spent a lot of time in my early days telling off a lot of senior managers at CIMB for what I call cloning. Instinctively, they were hiring people who came from the same gender, ethnic group, kampong or whatever. There was that instinct, and I think making diversity work is all about going against what comes naturally. Yeah, you must fight that natural instinct to be tribal, and the reason why it's worth doing is because you find that if you create diverse teams, you just become that bit more powerful. And I've seen it over and over again. I mean, even in my case, I remember when I became CEO at a very young age, the first thing I said, look, I need gray hairs around me. That was instinctive, right? Because, I need to basically balance out, my hot temper and my impatientness and so on and so forth. And then, clearly it's obvious that I think if you have a sales force, it's very clear. You need diverse teams, you need diverse gender, you need young people, you need old people. And appreciating that power of diversity, I think is really something worth taking on, I think. And then secondly, I think that just like the way ESG is implemented globally today, where companies that don't have a clear ESG agenda suffer from a lack of attention from capital or capital providers. And I think the same should be imposed here. I think for companies that don't apply diversity rules or agenda, we should starve them of capital. Maybe, government institutions for a start, EPF, PNB, and all that should basically say, look, we will reduce investment in companies that do not embrace diversity. I also think that in the case of women and for instance, I also think that the quota is okay. That's a good way of getting things started. I also recommended that given the gap between generations, Rosie, during our time, our kind of understanding with our parents was in and around there, whereas today, me and my children, the gap is huge, right? And so that brings around the importance of listening to the young and the potential that the potential impact the young can have on businesses even. So I actually suggested that in the cases of government companies those days, we should actually keep 1 or 2 board seats for the young, maybe on a rotational basis, but actually insisting that every board has one representative of an under 30, for instance, could be can be very powerful in itself, and it's a very innovative way of bringing in young thinking into boards.
I think bringing in both young and the female population onto boards is really important. And I think there's also, I mean, and we want to talk about the intergenerational side, but I think I know Rizal wants to talk about political empowerment, where we are really not doing well.
Well, on politics, I mean, there's a lot of talk and not enough walk.
Yeah.
If you look at the time when corporates, GLCs, we were told off by the government for not having enough women in management, in boards and all that. Then we look up at the cabinet. I remember the cabinet then, under the last BN government was like 30 ministers. There were 2 ladies. And then even in the PH government, there was 5. In the current government, there is 5. That's not enough. That's not enough. And so if you really want, you must lead by example. If you want your companies and your organizations to follow suit, then at the top they should do the same.
Well, it's really sad when we look at the numbers, right? I mean, it's like 15% of women in parliamentary seats. I mean, globally it's 25%. So, we're far behind. I mean, the whole world is not doing well, but I think we should benchmark on the best, So, and cabinet positions also like 13% versus 21%.
Rosie, on that note, can I perhaps ask a question to Dato Sri? Dato Sri, maybe you can share with us, you mentioned the parliament and cabinet, and these decisions made in parliament and also by the cabinet affects the wider population. And yet women and youth are right now severely underrepresented. What are the benefits of a more inclusive parliament and cabinet? And how can women and young leaders create opportunities for themselves to participate in that decision-making process that affect the nation? What issues do you think these young leaders can and should champion?
No, I think if you look at, the impact Syed Saddiq had, of course, he's not everybody's favorite, but he really set a benchmark with the legislation for Undi 18, which actually it was pretty rare that it was passed with cross aisle support, and that's the kind of thing only a young person who's really determined to make a difference can do. And I think I reflect back even in my leadership at CIMB. I wouldn't take CIMB to where I took it if I got the job at a much later date. I became CEO at 32. If I became CEO at 48, I would not have the drive and the guts to make a lot of decisions and to make a lot of the jumps that I took CIMB on. And similarly, I mean, I think look at New Zealand, for instance. I mean, I would say that you have a great example of a female prime minister doing an absolutely fantastic job, and I think some of it is because of her female instincts, if you like. There's a time and a place that you do need female instinct, and I think in terms of how to do this, unfortunately, the truth is power is with the men, and power is with the older men, and until we shout and are properly heard, and they recognize the importance of giving more opportunities to men and women, it ain't going to happen.
Rosie, before we continue with the conversation, can I perhaps take one question from the viewers right now? This is from Faris. Faris asked, CEO at a young age, that doesn't happen to any regular Joe in the street. Perhaps you can share with us your thoughts on that, and people are questioning that position. So what do you have to say about that?
I don't find the need to explain. I think a lot of people think that it must be because of my background and all that. But actually, you need to ask other people at CIB. You need to ask the guy who appointed me. But basically, what happened at that time was, there was a vacancy, and I had designed a career trajectory that actually turned out to be a good one, which is that I actually moved around various departments in CIMB. And so at the time, when they wanted someone to fill the deputy CEO role, I actually had the best CV. So, I don't feel the need to defend my appointment.
But you planned this career trajectory, right?
100%. I planned it. I wanted the job. After 3 years at CIMB, I got, I got very lucrative offers from those days, Merrill Lynch and Lehman Brothers to work in Hong Kong. I remember those days I was like, investment bankers were like footballers. We had sign-on bonuses and a real fat check. And it was very attractive. But then I said, look, I want to see what I can do here at CIMB. And I think if I move around a bit, I could build up the right CV to eventually lead this organization. And that's what I did.
But can young leaders still do that these days? Do they still have the opportunities to do that these days, to plan that trajectory and to perhaps aspire to become a CEO at such young age?
Well, I think yes. And, young people are also doing it in startups, successful startups and ventures. You look, Anthony Tan. I mean, how old was he when he made a success of Grab? I think let's stop looking at why not. Let's think about how. Yeah, a lot of people spend too much time saying, "Oh, I can't get there because I don't have this, I don't have that." Yeah, maybe, but why don't you focus on what you can control, and ask yourself whether you've actually tried hard enough.
Rosie?
Actually, I was interested about what Dato Sri Nazir said about the differences between you and your children, and also you couldn't have taken CIMB forward quite like that if you had been older. So I think one of the questions that seems to be asked a lot now is about intergenerational leadership and collaboration. I mean, let's face it, we now have this interesting and challenging mix of 5 generations in leadership. You've got the silent generation like Tun Mahathir, you've got the baby boomers who are our current Prime Minister, and then you and I, Nazir, we are Generation X's, right? So we sit in the middle, and then the millennials, people like Rizal, and then the even younger ones, Gen Z. So, I was watching, I've been following the aftermath of the Oprah interview with Harry and Meghan, right? Love them or hate them, it doesn't matter. But the point is, public opinion is split, right, along international, identity, and class lines, and across generations. So, I mean, Rizal and I were talking about it. What did you say, Rizal, about the woke generation?
Yes, Rosie, I think when we look at the national economic and political landscape, the younger generation or the woke generation look at things quite differently from the older generations. And perhaps there's a disconnect there. And Rosie, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, Nazir, I mean, we have these difficult conversations, right? I mean, there's all these 5 generations, right? So who is going to take us forward and in what way? So I think at the one end of the spectrum, do you actually think ageism exists towards older leaders at the helm, and is that well deserved? And at the other end, do these older leaders stand in the way of the younger generation, right, and taking their rightful place in nation building? Or should we not focus on just getting the best of each generation? Because we need to go forward, right? We need to be aggressive in going forward so that we can have a good future for Malaysia. And then just figure out a way, have a discourse, figure out a way to work together so that Malaysia can put our best foot forward. So I would really like to hear your thoughts, because you've worked with multi-generational leadership in that position.
I always think a blend is very important. But I think that every body, every position should have tenure limits. When I was CEO of CIMB, I was, I read a Harvard Business Review article that basically said, based on surveys, blah, 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 companies, CEOs should, optimally stay in their positions for 6.67 years or something like that. I stayed at CEO for 15 years, and I was always very conscious that actually towards the end, I thought I wasn't the right person for the job already. And I remember when I took that decision that I should step aside, it was because, I thought that I was doing a disservice to the organization because I'd been there for too long. So, if you look at it from the political standpoint, if a CEO shouldn't be there for shouldn't be there for too long, then look at the politicians today. And it's quite, odd that, we're still basically looking at political competition between, personalities that were doing it in the, late 80s and early 90s. I don't blame them. I blame us. My generation has actually failed. I think, we should pass the baton from the baby boomers or straight through the millennials, over to you guys, Rizal, because our generation just, we didn't stand up, we didn't take those leadership roles. I think most of my generation all decided to go into business rather than go into politics, so it's our doing. But as I said, in any team, in any leadership platform, it's always good to have diversity in generations.
And Dato Sri, I will let you perhaps reset your camera again because we really want to see you when you convey these messages. And Rosie, perhaps we can just reflect on the things that we have so far. I think I want to ask one more question on youth and digital and social media when Dato Sri comes back. But what do you think so far, Rosie?
Well, I mean, I think this whole and this question we should definitely ask to him when he gets back, right? I mean, like we talked about the handing over of power, right? I mean, the world, international, if you look at international politics, is going in two directions. You've got, the Sana Marines of the world, the Ardens of the world, the other young, progressive guys. And then, of course, you have, countries like the US that are voting in, the first Trump and then now Biden, right? So you have the world going in that split direction, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's something that, I mean, I definitely want to hear, his perspective on, yes, we want them to take over, but will the, in the legacy ecosystem, will that actually happen, right? I mean, it's ideal if it happens, and I think you should ask him that question because he said we should pass the baton to you, that as millennials. Because,
I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah, because
you guys need to change the system. I don't know what you guys do. Webinar jam ni tak boleh pakai Zoom je lah.
Dato Sri, in an ecosystem where legacy leadership, rightly or wrongly, seem to have vested interests and are not in sync with the rapid global changes, many young leaders perhaps want to influence and contribute to important decision-making process. But do you think senior leaders welcome these decisions? And do you think that the need to lead innovation and change in these disruptive times should fall to the younger generation?
No, I do. But at the same time, it's always good for the young to look in the mirror. I always did that when I grew up, right? As I evolved in my career, I used to look in the mirror every morning, not because I'm great looking, but because I wanted to ask myself whether, what are my own strengths and weaknesses, and then make sure that I do things to mitigate my weaknesses. Like I said, do I have the right skill sets? Do I have the right temperament for this job? And if I don't, I get the right people around me. So that is my, one piece of advice I always give people. It's a bit like, I take in the words of Michael Jackson, look at the man in the mirror every day and decide how to play the game to the best of your ability. And you must always remember, young people have a lot of good traits, but also they lack experience and they lack patience. And that's the things that, you need to lean on the older generation.
And perhaps I can ask you one more question before we move on to the next segment. Youth these days are a bit more engaged on digital and social media and can form collectives with each other faster. With the older generations focused on mainstream media and the younger generations on digital and social, how do we bridge that gap for intergenerational discourse?
Well, I think we should go both ways, right? We should, I think, drag some of the older generation into these new platforms, certainly, and to the extent that they can't, the younger should go there. But these new platforms are all very potentially very useful, but there's always a danger of building your own echo chambers. And I think that's kind of driving a lot of growing division across the world, where you can basically find big groups of people with your extreme views, right? You don't feel the need to moderate. You don't feel the need to listen to other people because you can get very, very comfortable in your own echo chambers. And this is something that world over we need to think about.
Rosie?
Well, I think some of us in the generation X's, Nazir, we like to try all the news, the new media, right? So I think there needs to be a bridge. You're absolutely right. So I think before, we encourage everybody, we've got quite a few questions, but before we go there, I think we've had that conversation with Dato Sri Nazir on nation building, international competitiveness, inclusivity, and intergenerational engagement. So now we're going to get to the lighter stuff before we get to the questions. So, Nazir, we're going to start our series of quick fire leadership questions. And the reason we do this is it's the first thing that comes to your mind, right? So for each of these questions, you have less than 20 seconds to answer. So let's kick off. Okay, I'm going to read your statement. It is very lonely at the top. Do you agree with this statement, and why?
No, 100%. Because you carry burden of a lot of decisions, and you don't really know who your friends are, who the vested interests around you are.
Speaking of decision, what was the most difficult decision you had to make as a leader, and how did you come to that decision?
Most difficult decision was to quit. To basically decide that I was not the best person to lead the organization. It was tough, but then I thought about it long and hard, and I decided that I'd been there for too long. I was making decisions without effective checks and balances, because whatever I say went, and I think that's not good for any organization.
So the next question is something that tends to be really popular, so we want to pose it to you. Which leader inspires you? Which leader do you like the least, and why?
The least is Donald Trump. I don't need to explain.
Okay.
The leader that inspires me most actually is my late father, because I studied him greatly, especially after I retired. I spent a lot of time studying his leadership, and I think he had very, very powerful leadership traits that we should learn from.
Speaking of traits for future leaders of the nation, what are the top 3 important characteristics of traits or skills to have?
Well, actually, if you go back to my point about Tun Razak, I think one thing he was a few things. One is he was an person. He sometimes he was a bit contradictory, but one trait was, or the double trait was, he was consultative, yet he was very bold. Right. He used to engage, but very decisive when he had to be. He was extremely. He was very confident. He was so confident in himself. He was very self-assured, and he didn't worry about appointing or working with people who were strong characters, who were his enemies. He was very good at working with such characters. I mean, you look at after 69, he realized that what he needed was a very strong character to check him, because he had dictatorial powers. So he appointed Tun Ismail, and Dr. Ismail was, he didn't suffer fools. He would raise his voice even to his boss, and that's a strong character to be able to appoint someone like that as your number 2. I also think that he was very good at grooming others. If you look at those days, the next generation of leaders during the Tun Razak time, the deputy ministers were people like Musa Hitam and Rafida Aziz, Rais Yatim. Those were future leaders that he brought in. He thought about leadership succession, whereas 20 years later we saw the lineup of deputy ministers. Some of them were 60 years old.
Rosie?
I've got a quick fire question from Salina Noordin, who is between Monaco and Jakarta. What is the biggest misconception on leadership?
The biggest misconception?
Misperception.
I guess misperception on leadership is, I think, the glamour of it. I think a lot of people strive to be a leader because of the glam and so on. But when you get there, you realize that there's a huge price to pay for the glam.
I've got a question from New Titipum. Is leadership for everyone?
No. 100%. I think you need to be very conscious. And I always told a lot of people, that's the problem in an organization. People do well, they make a lot of money in whatever they do, and suddenly they say, okay, it's time for me to be promoted to a leadership position. And I used to counsel a lot of people, look, you're damn good at what you do, make a lot of money doing what you do, but you're not a leader. And you shouldn't strive to be a leader. You just, you're a good trader or whatever, you make a lot of money doing that. Leadership is not for everybody. Leadership requires sacrifice. Leadership requires empathy, and I don't think you have that.
Rosie?
So I have a question from Mikael of Kuala Lumpur. Take away sleep disorders. What keeps you awake at night?
Honestly, my kids. My kids keep me awake at night. I think about their future. I think, whether they're happy and so on and so forth. But I think about the future, the country that we are leaving to them later, and so on. That does keep me awake, and I'm sure as a parent, many of you share the same.
I've got a question from Nitin Jaswal. Everyone talks about young entrepreneurship. What is your view on silver entrepreneurship as they bring experience and wisdom?
Yeah, I think why not? I think after I retired as a banker, I also became an entrepreneur. It's as I said, we should have all sorts.
I have a question from Nitin Jaiswal. Everyone talks about young entrepreneurship. What is your view on silver entrepreneurship as they bring experience, the wisdom of experience?
I think I asked that
That's
Rosie
the same
earlier.
question, Rosie.
Yeah. Rosie, you want to ask the next question from our viewers? Oh, I've got one question, Dato Sri. Dear Dato, this is from Ravi Kumaran. Dear Dato, this perhaps is a bit longer. Dear Dato, why still some of our politicians and leaders using religion, race-based politics and business in Malaysia? Do we still need to accept this kind of business and politics since we are a multiracial country? What's your opinion on this kind of leaders?
Well, first of all, they are, obviously we don't like them. We don't like people who inflame division. We don't like people who use race and religion for political gain. But, the problem is the system. And I keep saying this, I've seen very good people go into politics with all the best of intentions. And next thing you know, they're racist demagogues. And it's because that is the way they find they need to survive. And this is why I keep saying we need to take a step back and overhaul the system. If the incentives are such that you look at the way our constituencies are today, if you want to be if you go and to a seat in the north east, for instance, then you become a racist. That's probably the most the surest way to win your seat. And so it starts with our political system, and I challenge the suitability of our first past the post system. I think a more proportional representation, more mixed constituency representation, those are the kind of innovations in politics that we need to introduce as part of the overall reform. But to your question, I 100% agree that's a huge problem in Malaysia. We should be thinking of Bangsa Malaysia, we'll be thinking of building a new Malaysia, but we cannot do that unless we really are willing to overhaul.
Okay, and then Dato Sri, what does it take? I've got another question from a viewer. Agree with Dato with female and young youth involvement. What happens to the experienced people who has great knowledge too? This is from Rajini Shalish.
You mean what happens to them?
Yeah, what happens with people to the experienced people who has great knowledge too? I think the dichotomy between female young youth involvement and the opposite of people already have with experience and they already
I mean that's very important. Like just because we highlight the lack of youth, lack of women, doesn't mean that we're going to throw all the experienced men out. I think it's about getting the right balance, and in any organization or any setting, I think getting the right combination is key. But as I said, part of creating that renewal process is also the need to limit tenure, because unfortunately, people with long tenure actually become very powerful. They know all the tricks of the game, how to protect themselves, keep them in their position. So unless they are forced to step aside, it's very difficult to get them out.
And Rosie? Okay, I think Rosie has a technical issue with the audio. I'll ask one more question, Sri. From K, Kuala Lumpur, more and more younger Malaysians feel that to thrive, being abroad is preferable. Would you consider this self-serving? I think we've talked about this earlier, but would you consider this as self-serving?
No, I don't think it's right for me to judge that either way. I think people have to make their own decisions. I would like to hope that people, as many people as possible come home and try and help make a better Malaysia. But I don't begrudge people for saying that, look, I don't think, I want to take that on. I want to be happy making a life overseas. I can't begrudge them.
And perhaps the last question from Hasna Abdullah, do you take gender as a factor for leadership?
Well, as I said, yes, in a sense that I think we need a good mix on any leadership platform. And if you ask me whether soon we should have a female prime minister, 100%. I look forward to that, and maybe a female prime minister is around the corner.
Perhaps you want to take about a minute to wrap up this conversation, Dato Sri, and where do you see this country moving forward? Right now, we are experiencing this great calamity right now, but there's an opportunity for a reset as well. What are some of the low-hanging fruits do you believe we can win, and the medium-term wins we can look at when we move forward?
Well, I think, to state the obvious, this is a great country with enormous potential. And if you look back at different moments in history, we were, potential world beaters in many respects. If you look at, GDP per capita of Malaysia and South Korea in the late 70s, we were the same. We were beating them in football, right? And look at the difference in GDP and where the footballers are today. And that says that, maybe we have, taken a few wrong paths. And, I've thought very hard about this issue. And as I keep saying, it's a systemic issue. And if we don't deal with the system, I think we will continue with this subpar economic growth. I think we will continue to grow division between our communities. We will continue to lose a lot of talents to overseas. And I think, yes, we're not, it's not like 69 where we're beating each other up. So there's no crisis of that nature. But, it can be, it's almost like slow death instead. And I think the sooner we all step forward and face the reality, the sooner I think we take on this challenge of resetting the country.
On that note, we thank you very much, Dato Sri Nazir Razak, for being our first guest on our first show. Look out for more next episode, or for the next episode of Leader Speakeasy with Rizal and Rozina. 2 weeks from now, follow Astro AWANI on our digital platforms as well as LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to get the latest updates. Thank you very much, Dato Sri, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you
Rosie.
so much.
Rosie, you're
Sorry.
back.
Rosie, you're
No,
back.
I couldn't hear, so hence the repeated question.
I think you need to fix your technical problems for the next guy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
All right.
We really
Thanks, guys.
appreciate you coming on board.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.